Have you ever wondered why the moment you stop chasing something, it begins to move toward you? The job, the lover, the respect, the peace, all seem to arrive only after you've stopped clutching at them. There is something paradoxical in the human soul. The more it grasps, the less it holds. The more it needs, the weaker it becomes. But when a man no longer seeks validation, when a woman stops performing for approval, the world begins to orbit them instead. To care less is not to be careless. It is to master the subtle art of detachment, the discipline of refusing to let the external dictate the internal. The Stoics knew this long before modern psychology gave it new names. They called it apatheia. Not apathy, but a luminous calmness, a still mind untouched by the chaos of outcomes. In that stillness, something extraordinary happens. Power returns to its rightful owner. In every age, humanity has been seduced by noise. The noise of opinions, the weight of comparison, the endless theater of appearances. Today, perhaps more than ever, people confuse effort with control. They believe that to care deeply is to grip tightly, to worry, to plan, to fear losing. But caring in that way is not strength. It is slavery. It is the silent confession that one's peace depends on external permission. Look closely at those who seem effortlessly magnetic. The man who does not rush to explain himself. The woman who walks away instead of pleading to be understood. They hold a quiet authority that cannot be faked because it is born from within. It is not arrogance, but equilibrium, a state where attention is given only to what one can command, perception, thought, and action. Everything else dissolves into irrelevance. The Stoic lives by an inner hierarchy of control. What belongs to me, my judgments, my choices, my discipline, is sacred. What does not, reputation, outcome, opinion, is dust on the wind. This boundary is not coldness, it is clarity. When Seneca wrote that he is most powerful who has himself in his own power, he was not speaking of dominance over others, but liberation from dependence on them. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Attachment breeds anxiety. Control illusions breed burnout. The ego, when starved of validation, panics, like a drowning man clutching water. But when the ego is disciplined by detachment, the psyche breathes. It discovers that peace is not the absence of care, but the precision of it, caring for what is real, not what is reactive. Every human carries two selves, the performing self that chases applause, and the observing self that watches silently behind the eyes. The performing self is loud, desperate to be liked, terrified of insignificance. The observing self is still. It cares only for alignment with truth. Stoicism invites the return to that inner observer. It teaches that serenity is not a reward, but a practice, a daily refusal to trade peace for approval. Imagine standing in the storm of criticism, rejection, or failure, yet remaining unmoved, not because you're numb, but because you see the storm for what it is, temporary, external, powerless to alter who you are. That is the art of not caring. It is not withdrawal from life, but mastery of it. To care less is to understand that not every emotion deserves obedience. Anger may knock, you need not open. Fear may whisper, you need not follow. The Stoic mind observes emotion without surrendering to it, as a mountain observes passing clouds. The higher your elevation, the smaller the storm appears. And yet, detachment does not mean lifelessness. A Stoic heart can love fiercely, work diligently, dream boldly, but without the poison of dependence. When you no longer need the result to justify your effort, the effort itself becomes pure. That purity is freedom. It transforms every act into art, every failure into lesson, every silence into strength. You begin to realize that not caring is not the rejection of feeling. It is the rejection of distortion. It is seeing clearly what is yours to carry and what is not. You stop negotiating with chaos. You stop seeking peace in other people's hands. You stop performing for an audience that does not exist. And slowly, the noise fades. The opinions blur. The world, once a battlefield of comparison, becomes a canvas of choices. You move with less tension, speak with more precision, love with less fear. You stop reacting and begin responding. You stop grasping and start growing. Care less, and you become untouchable. Not because you escape pain, but because you are no longer owned by it. Detachment, once tasted, changes everything. You begin to see how most people are prisoners of invisible strings. The pull of opinion, the fear of loss, the hunger for recognition. They do not live, they perform. Every word, every action is an attempt to be seen as worthy. But the more one performs, the less authentic one becomes. The Stoic, however, severs those strings. He moves through life like a quiet storm, deliberate, grounded, unreachable. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he was not giving comfort. He was giving command. The command to withdraw your energy from illusion and redirect it toward mastery. Most people spend their lives trying to control the uncontrollable, the outcome of relationships, the thoughts of others, the unpredictable tides of fortune. But the Stoic reclaims that energy. Instead of chasing results, he sharpens perception. Instead of begging for validation, he refines virtue. In modern psychology, this principle echoes through every model of inner peace. When attention is scattered across what lies beyond control, the nervous system collapses under invisible weight. But when focus narrows to the controllable, thoughts, discipline, response, the body softens, breath deepens, presence returns. You begin to inhabit yourself again. You stop living in other people's reactions. This shift is not a trick of mindset. It is a transformation of identity. You stop being the actor and become the author. You stop reacting from insecurity and begin acting from integrity. The world may not change, but the way it moves through you does. Care less, and paradoxically, you perform better. The athlete who stops fearing failure moves more freely. The artist who stops chasing approval creates more authentically. The lover who no longer begs for reassurance becomes more magnetic. This is not superstition. It's psychology. Fear constricts. Detachment expands. When the outcome no longer defines your worth, excellence becomes effortless. But to reach that point, one must confront the shadow, the part of the psyche addicted to control. The shadow whispers that love must be earned, that peace must be deserved, that value must be proven. It craves applause because it does not trust silence. It fears being unseen because it confuses attention with existence. The Stoic looks this shadow in the eye and says, "You may exist, but you no longer command me." Every step toward detachment is an act of rebellion against the ego's tyranny. It is choosing restraint over reaction, silence over justification, distance over drama. The modern world rewards outrage, the loudest voice, the quickest reply, the most visible wound. But the Stoic sees through the performance. He knows that strength that must announce itself is weakness in disguise. Caring less is not a rejection of empathy. It is the refinement of it. It is refusing to waste compassion on manipulation. It is choosing where your soul invests its energy. To care less is to stop bleeding for every battle that doesn't belong to you. It is to preserve your power for what truly matters: virtue, creation, contribution. When you stop chasing control, you start cultivating grace. You respond without resentment, walk away without noise, love without possession. The detachment does not make you indifferent. It makes you incorruptible. You become like still water, reflective, deep, unfazed by the pebbles thrown by lesser minds. There is a sacred dignity in emotional minimalism, saying less, reacting slower, choosing stillness over spectacle. You are no longer addicted to being understood. You begin to understand yourself. You stop begging for peace and start building it, brick by disciplined brick. The world does not change when you care less. You change. And because you change, the world's grip weakens. People sense it. They test your silence, but your silence holds. They try to provoke your insecurity, but your calm unnerves them. They withdraw, confused, because they cannot manipulate what they cannot move. That is the art of not caring, not the apathy of emptiness, but the fullness of mastery. You no longer crave to be chosen because you have chosen yourself. You no longer fear rejection because you no longer reject your solitude. You no longer beg for validation because your presence validates itself. In that serenity, you discover an ancient secret: that peace is not passive, it is power in still form. Freedom begins when the mind no longer trembles before uncertainty. The ordinary person seeks stability through control, grasping at predictability as if the world could be tamed. The Stoic sees through the illusion. He understands that chaos is not the enemy, dependence is. What breaks most people is not the storm itself, but their insistence that the storm should not exist. Life, by its nature, resists control. Seasons shift, people leave, fortunes turn. The Stoic's secret lies in his willingness to let these truths breathe without resistance. To care less is to cease bargaining with reality. It is to stand before the uncontrollable with quiet acceptance, and to say, "You may do as you please, I remain unmoved." This posture is not born of arrogance, but intimacy with truth. The mind that stops negotiating with the inevitable discovers serenity, not as an emotion, but as a state of alignment. You stop asking life to be easy. You start asking yourself to be strong. And that shift changes everything. Psychology calls this radical acceptance, the integration of what is, without distortion. When the inner narrative no longer demands perfection, the nervous system relaxes. Resistance dissolves into awareness. You begin to see how much suffering comes not from pain itself, but from the stories attached to it. The Stoic strips those stories away, layer by layer, until only reality remains, unembellished, unthreatening, pure. Modern life, however, trains the opposite reflex. It teaches that caring is virtue, that worry equals love, that control ensures safety. But beneath that cultural script lies exhaustion, the anxious compulsion to manage everything and everyone. To care less is to rebel against that fatigue. It is to choose depth over drama, clarity over control. Imagine a woman walking through a crowded marketplace. Around her, voices argue, merchants shout, eyes judge. She hears it all, but her pace does not falter. Her attention is not elsewhere. It is inward, anchored in the calm conviction that nothing external defines her. That is not aloofness. That is sovereignty. Every human carries within them the seed of that sovereignty, but most never water it. They pour energy into what they cannot keep: opinions, outcomes, recognition. and in doing so, they neglect the one domain truly theirs, their response. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Those words are not philosophy. They are liberation condensed into a sentence. To care less, then, is to reclaim your reactions from the chaos of impulse. It is the decision to act, not to react. To pause between stimulus and response, and in that pause, to choose virtue over vanity. When you no longer rush to defend your ego, you discover how rarely offense is worth the energy it consumes. When you no longer chase what flees, you discover that patience magnetizes what is meant to stay. The Stoic art of not caring is a form of emotional aikido, redirecting the energy of life instead of colliding with it. You stop fighting shadows and begin flowing with structure. You learn that caring less is not the end of passion, it is the beginning of precision. You no longer waste devotion on what drains you. You invest it where it grows, and strangely, everything begins to change. Relationships stabilize, work flows more naturally, respect arrives uninvited, because when you stop grasping, people feel safer in your presence. Your calm becomes contagious. Your silence becomes louder than argument. Detachment, practiced long enough, becomes a kind of quiet magnetism. You stop announcing your worth, and suddenly it becomes obvious. You stop explaining your choices, and suddenly they speak for themselves. The Stoic does not posture. He radiates. When you stop caring about appearing strong, you finally become it. The moment detachment becomes second nature, your perception shifts in ways most cannot imagine. You begin to see how everything that once seemed urgent is, in truth, inconsequential. The arguments that once kept you awake now appear as echoes of insecurity. The people who once had power over your mood reveal themselves as mirrors, reflecting only the places where you had not yet mastered yourself. Caring less is not withdrawal, it is refinement. It is the sculptor's hand chipping away excess marble to reveal the silent form within. Every attachment, every fear of loss, every need for approval, these are the unnecessary fragments that obscure the soul's true design. Detachment is the art of removal until only essence remains, and yet, few are willing to live this way. Most would rather drown in noise than sit in silence. They confuse attachment with love, attention with connection, busyness with purpose. They do not understand that the more you try to hold the world, the less of it you can feel. The Stoic holds nothing tightly, and thus feels everything deeply. In the modern world, this paradox feels almost rebellious. To not care excessively is to reject the social economy built on validation. It is to step outside the marketplace of approval, where worth is auctioned to the highest bidder. When you no longer sell yourself for acceptance, you become priceless. There is a subtle shift that occurs when one stops caring about how one appears. The mind quiets, the body softens, the words slow down. You no longer speak to convince, you speak to clarify. You no longer act to impress, you act to align. It is a quieter way of existing, yet infinitely more powerful, because true influence requires no announcement. It emanates. You start noticing how the world responds differently. The more you release, the more comes to you. People are drawn not to your effort, but to your ease. They feel the calm of someone who does not chase, and they crave it, though they do not understand it. The detached soul becomes magnetic, precisely because it no longer needs to be. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole, no longer ruled by the collective's noise. The Stoics lived it without naming it. To individuate is to cease being defined by others' expectations. It is to live from the center outward, not from the periphery inward. When you care less about how life appears, you begin to experience how it feels. And in that feeling, truth arises. But this freedom has a price. To truly not care, you must first face everything you once feared to lose. The relationship, the reputation, the comfort, all must be held up to the light and questioned. Does this define me, or do I define it? If it defines you, let it go. If it serves your becoming, keep it lightly. Nothing kills peace faster than the need to preserve illusions. The Stoic's strength lies in this fearless inventory. He does not hide from loss. He studies it. He walks willingly into the emptiness others flee from and finds himself waiting there. For in detachment, one discovers that what remains after everything falls away is not nothing. It is the foundation of everything. In the ancient texts, there is a word for this, ataraxia, unshakable tranquility. It is not ignorance of pain, but immunity to its tyranny. When you have accepted that you control nothing but your perception, the universe becomes an ally, not an adversary. You learn to work with the current, not against it. And from that place, achievement takes on new meaning. Success is no longer measured by outcomes, but by alignment. You no longer ask, did I win? But was I true? You no longer fear failure, because failure itself becomes a form of purification, a teacher stripping away false motives. To care less, in the Stoic sense, is not to abandon ambition, but to purify it. It is ambition without anxiety, pursuit without poison. You act with total commitment, but zero desperation. You give everything and expect nothing. The paradox reveals itself again. When you no longer need to win, you begin to win more often. For victory belongs not to the one who grasps, but to the one who glides. True mastery emerges not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet between desires. When ambition no longer screams for attention, when fear no longer dictates motion, the human spirit begins to act from a place of still precision. This is where the Stoic dwells, in the realm beyond reaction. To care less is not to float aimlessly. It is to move intentionally. Every gesture becomes deliberate, every word weighted. You are no longer running toward approval or away from rejection. You are simply moving, like a river that carves mountains without asking permission. This is the calm power of the unbothered. Modern psychology calls this detached involvement. You are fully present, yet emotionally free. You give yourself entirely to the moment, but expect nothing in return. This state is the death of manipulation, because no one can control what does not crave outcome. And paradoxically, in this state, results flow more naturally. The Stoic man does not care less because he feels less. He cares less because he understands more. He knows that emotion, ungoverned, is a trickster. It inflates victories and magnifies defeats. But emotion, disciplined, becomes intuition, sharp, calm, reliable. When the mind is still, emotion becomes signal, not noise. The world admires those who appear unshaken, but few understand the discipline beneath that stillness. It is not built overnight. It is forged through countless acts of letting go, of not answering every provocation, of not needing every apology, of not chasing every fleeting high. Each restraint polishes the soul into something indestructible. The ego hates this process. It will beg you to care again, to react, to prove. It whispers, "They'll think you're weak if you don't respond." But wisdom smiles at the bait and remains silent. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. It says, I no longer invest energy where truth does not dwell. To care less is to begin conserving energy like a seasoned warrior. No movement wasted, no emotion misplaced. You begin to notice the beauty in restraint. Not every truth must be spoken, not every wound defended, not every invitation accepted. Your calm becomes a filter, separating what deserves your energy from what merely demands it. And soon, something astonishing happens. Peace stops being conditional. It no longer depends on what others say or do. It no longer wavers with outcomes. You stop waiting for perfect circumstances to feel whole, because you have discovered that wholeness was never missing, only obscured by attachment. This is where power lives, not in control of others, but in mastery of self. When you no longer chase what you cannot command, you become unstoppable in what you can. The energy once wasted on anxiety fuels creation. The attention once squandered on noise turns inward, forging clarity. The time once lost to reaction becomes devotion to excellence. You rise each morning not to conquer the world, but to command your mind. And that subtle shift changes everything. The day no longer owns you. Circumstance no longer defines you. You move like one who has nothing to prove, because the only competition that remains is with your former self. There is a quiet authority in such a person, not loud, not theatrical, but undeniable. They do not announce their peace, they embody it. Their indifference to approval makes their presence magnetic. Their refusal to chase makes their value self-evident. And so the paradox completes itself once more. By caring less, you attract more. More respect, more balance, more clarity. But not because you sought them. They arrive as byproducts of discipline, not desperation. To care less is to live with both feet grounded in reality and both eyes fixed inward. You are no longer a leaf in the wind of others' emotions. You are the mountain that wind cannot move. Detachment is a quiet revolution, and once it begins, the world can no longer reach you in the same way. You stop oscillating between hope and despair, success and failure, praise and blame. These pairs, once magnetic poles pulling your emotions apart, lose their grip. You exist between them, not numb, but balanced. To care less is to live from center, not circumference. The world still moves, opinions still swirl, ambitions still burn, desires still rise. But you are anchored. You observe them all without being consumed. And in that observation, wisdom grows. You realize that nothing external was ever truly about you. People react from their own wounds, their own shadows. Events unfold by their own logic, indifferent to your preferences. Freedom begins where personalization ends. Seneca once wrote, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." Most of human pain is anticipation, not experience. Anxiety about outcomes that haven't arrived, guilt over moments long gone. Detachment interrupts that spiral. It says, now is enough. You stop predicting pain and start living presence. This presence is not passive, it's awake. You begin to notice subtle details, the rhythm of your breath, the tone of your thoughts, the texture of silence. When the mind is uncluttered by worry, the senses sharpen. You begin to feel life again, but without clinging to it. In that clarity, relationships transform. You stop trying to control love and begin to allow it. You stop demanding reciprocity and begin to embody generosity. True connection thrives in freedom, not possession. To care less is to love more purely, without the chains of expectation. You can let someone go and still wish them peace. You can be rejected and still remain whole. This serenity terrifies the unhealed. They will call you distant, cold, detached. But in truth, you have become what they fear most: self-sufficient. You no longer dance to the rhythm of emotional manipulation. You can sit in solitude without panic, walk away without guilt, speak truth without apology. Such autonomy feels like defiance to those addicted to control. Modern life teaches us to measure worth by reaction. The faster you respond, the more you care. The Stoic reverses that logic. He pauses, breathes, and decides whether the moment deserves a fragment of his peace. Most moments do not. And so, the Stoic becomes immune to noise, not because he avoids it, but because it can no longer penetrate. When you care less, you also fear less. The mind that no longer worships outcome cannot be enslaved by loss. You can face uncertainty without trembling, because your foundation is internal. The Stoics called this self-command, a fortress of reason guarded by discipline. Modern psychology calls it secure attachment to self. Whatever the name, it is the same truth. Peace is not given, it is generated. And something mystical happens when this peace becomes habitual. Life begins to bend toward you. The job you once chased calls back. The person who once doubted your worth begins to respect your silence. The goals you once obsessed over manifest without strain. Why? Because energy once wasted on anxiety now flows toward creation. Detachment redirects life's current. You no longer need to convince, to prove, to beg. You simply are. The irony is profound. When you stop needing to control life, life begins to cooperate. When you stop gripping outcomes, outcomes align more naturally. Effort remains, but it is clean, uncluttered, graceful. This is the Stoic's secret: to achieve more by caring less, to move with purpose, not pressure, to act with precision, not desperation. The less you need, the more you attract. The less you fear, the freer you act. The less you chase, the more you arrive. Care less, and you enter a different gravity where power is quiet and peace is strength. There comes a point in every disciplined soul's journey where detachment becomes something holier than strategy. It becomes essence. You begin to realize that caring less is not an act of withdrawal, but a revelation of truth. The world never belonged to you, and it was never meant to. You were only ever meant to master your inner world, to hold dominion over your thoughts, your responses, your peace. Everything beyond that is merely weather passing over the mountain of your mind. In this realization, the chase dissolves. You stop running after success as if it were oxygen. You stop pleading for love as if it were salvation. You stop fearing loss as if it could diminish your soul. What remains is stillness, a serenity born from self-trust. You no longer ask, will things work out? You simply know that you will. Marcus Aurelius once said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this, you have the power to revoke at any moment. This is not mere philosophy. It is the code of emotional invincibility. When perception becomes your domain, chaos loses its fangs. You learn that control is not about bending reality, but about bending your interpretation of it. Modern psychology agrees. The nervous system, when no longer conditioned to panic over uncertainty, finds its equilibrium. Detachment recalibrates biology. It lowers cortisol, steadies breath, and rewires the brain to recognize peace as the baseline, not the reward. You are no longer surviving life, you are shaping it from within. And from that inner stillness, your actions become infinitely more effective. The detached person does not act less, they act cleaner. They do not waste motion on resistance. They do not wage war with what simply is. Their energy becomes directional, like a laser, focused only where impact exists. This is why the Stoic often appears effortless. To the untrained eye, it looks like he doesn't care. But look closer. He cares precisely, intentionally, in measured doses. He gives his effort to the controllable, his compassion to the deserving, his silence to the foolish, and his peace to himself. Nothing wasted, nothing spilled. The modern world interprets such composure as coldness because it cannot comprehend power without noise. But true power is quiet. It walks softly, speaks rarely, and never announces its arrival. The Stoic doesn't chase status or love or recognition. He simply becomes the kind of person to whom those things gravitate naturally. To care less is to stop asking life for permission to be calm. It is to decide, today and every day, that no circumstance will earn or remove your peace. You grant yourself the dignity of detachment. You stop begging for closure and begin embodying completion. You stop searching for validation and start radiating sufficiency. And so, the man who once begged for attention now commands it. The woman who once feared rejection now chooses solitude with grace. The person who once sought purpose through productivity now finds it in presence. The external world continues its endless dance, but the Stoic no longer joins every rhythm. He watches, he smiles, he remains. This is not indifference, it is enlightenment. It is living in full alignment with the truth that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal can be sustained. You no longer participate in every drama because peace has become your only ambition. In that space, life becomes astonishingly light. You work because you love mastery, not because you fear failure. You love because it expands you, not because it fills a void. You rest because you deserve restoration, not because you're escaping the world. And at the summit of this inner evolution stands a single truth, so simple, so quiet, that most overlook it. Freedom begins where need ends.